So what is at the core of the latest chaos going in the United States? Joining us in Bloomington, Indiana, in the U.S., Matthew Heimbach, who is the chairman of the Traditional Worker Party, also known as a party that is representing white supremacists. So let me ask you, Mr. Heimbach, first of all, welcome to our program. Secondly, what do you make of President Trump's remarks recently and many people's counter arguments against what he exactly said?
Well, it's an honor to be here. And the most important thing to realize about the event is Mr. Trump is correct. We were there to be able to exercise our rights, to stand up for our heritage, to be able to advocate for the best interests of our community. And we were attacked by radical anarchists, radical left-wingers that wanted to use violence, that used knives, that used bleach they tried to throw in our eyes, that they used baseball bats, that they were assaulting us, bringing an assault upon us when we defended ourselves. So Mr. Trump identifying what happened.
But 3 people were killed.
Being the victims of an assault is very important.
3 people were killed, not from your camp, but rather from the other camp.
Yes, the radical leftists, their chants they were doing were about killing us. They were very, very violent. This is a history in America of political violence.
But
by the
what I'm saying, sir, is that a person died from the other camp, from your camp. So how can you explain that?
The vehicle that Mr. Fields was driving was struck with baseball bats, was attacked by the radical leftists, and in that case, he feared for his life. This is an example.
And therefore,
of the
he
radical
go
left
to
in
the
America
others, use the
committing
car
violence.
to crash the others?
Yes, the radical leftists were attacking his vehicle. As you can see in the videos, his windshield was smashed, his car was smashed.
Let's move to the other question. What is going to be the use of parties like yours in the United States? Is it going to make your country ever more peaceful and diversified? Is it going to make your country respected elsewhere in the world? Mr. Heimbach.
We as the Traditionalist Worker Party believe in a post-global multipolar world. We want to be able to work with allies around the world to respect
Who are your allies?
Of influence. Our allies, we support the Eurasian movement, Professor Alexander Dugin, speaking about a safer, more prosperous world
for
each country, for all peoples. We believe that, for instance, China and the DPRK have their own sphere of influence. Russia has theirs. And we, as white nationalists in our community, as patriots that believe we have a duty and honor and responsibility to our ancestors and our descendants to have control of our own destiny and to bring peace to the world.
Last but certainly not least, the very last question for you, this time at least. Mr. Heimbach, you see the statues of some of the earlier symbols of white supremacists have been removed from Charlottesville, from some of the other cities in the United States as well. Some say this is going to be a wrapping up period, decades and hundreds of years following the Civil War. What do you make of it? Do you think your organization will still have any space in your future in terms of in the U.S. society and being accepted by the others? Mr. Heimbach.
The assault upon our heritage is by, pardon my pronunciation, the Baizu, the white liberals that hate culture, they hate identity, they hate tradition, and they want to bring anarchy to our streets. They want to disrupt our society. We are advocating for our people, for our heritage, and for our children to have a political voice to bring peace, prosperity, not only to us, but to all people.
So actually you hate all of the others?
No, we want to be able to work with all different other groups. That's why we work with communities of color. We do outreach to nationalist groups around the world. And we believe in a world that is post-global, that is multipolar, where we work together as one for a more peaceful planet.
Matthew Heimbach, coming from Indiana, Bloomington. Thank you for being with us. So what is really going on in the United States? Those are the words coming only from one camp and one extreme camp. We want to bring those words to you to understand the basis that we are talking about related to the chaos going on in the United States earlier this week. But for now, we're going to loop in our panelists. What is the word on racial tensions in the U.S.? Helping us to understand the real situation. Beijing studio, Da Wei, who is the director of the American Studies of China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations. Sir, welcome to our program. In Washington, D.C., we have Brandon Andrews, a former U.S. Senate staff who is representing, I guess, the Republican side for us, the director now of Impact. And also in Chicago, U.S., we have Laura Schwartz, a political commentator who has worked at the White House during the Clinton years. Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to have the three of you. Earlier, you heard the words from one camp and one extreme camp. It would help us to understand how deep the water is in the United States right now. Laura, I want to have your very short response to what Mr. Heimbach just said?
It's incredibly disturbing, to say the least. And these groups that this man represents may be on the fringe, but they're certainly getting a lot of cover from President Trump and a lot of coverage. And that's very concerning to me and much of America.
Mr. Andrews as well.
Well, this is really an opportunity for Republicans and the Republican Party at every level, local, state, and federal, to once and for all disavow white supremacy and distance itself from groups like those represented by the guest. Mr. Trump has certainly made it much more difficult for Republicans to move positive policy agendas forward and to continue to reach out to more diverse communities and bring them in and do good things for them. But we have to disavow this. We have to move past this and move beyond this. And quite frankly, when you talk about culture and heritage, many of those Confederate statues were erected in the 20s and 30s and were erected to represent white supremacy in communities and to represent public places where immigrants, African Americans, et cetera, could not go. And so we need to remove those pieces as well.
Right. Of course, we heard very different voices coming from the other two panelists. I guess mainly represent big voices here in the United States. Mr. Dawei, from China's perspective, of course, we are only observing what's going on in that country, but as a researcher of American study, you see the waves of debates going on and even some violence going on throughout the years. What do you make of the latest situation?
I think now the U.S. politics has already entered a new era, that the race politics has emerged. After 1960s, I think the race relations become relatively calm, but in recent years it re-emerged, I think, even from the Obama administration, the Obama era. And now I think the victory of the President Trump in the election emboldened or encouraged those white supremacists and the white nationalist voice in the United States. I think, in the U.S., of course, we know in the society, in the political life, there is political correctness. I think this is very useful latch to lock, to leash the white nationalism, the white supremacists sentiments in the United States. But I think the rhetorics and some of the policies that President Trump has staged, I think, encouraged them and unleashed that sentiment, let them out of the box.
The question is, what about the Republican Party? Is the Republican Party in ally with President Trump to create the current situation, or at least creating conditions for the current situation? Mr. Andrews.
Well, no, the Republican Party isn't an ally to white supremacy. It's not an ally to white supremacist groups. It's not an ally to those who believe in racism, sexism, etc. However, the Republican Party has not done a good enough job of distancing itself from these groups. It has not done a good enough job historically of ensuring that the policies that are being put in place by the party reflect a more diverse country. And so there's certainly blame to be laid at the feet of the Republican Party when you have the leader of the party, who is Mr. Donald Trump, who's the president, saying these things and continuing to dissemble and to make the waters murky about his association with folks like David Duke and others who believe in white supremacy. But no, this isn't a Republican thing. This is a white supremacy thing, and they have found a home in the Republican Party, and we need to do our best to push them out.
Ms. Schwartz, do you agree with that distinction that Mr. Andrew made, which is they are finding a base in the Republican Party but not representing the Republican Party at all?
I do completely agree with Brendan on this, because you saw all these Trump T-shirts that the white supremacists were wearing in Charlottesville. You see them speaking more freely because they think that Donald Trump has given them the opportunity to do so. You've seen the former Grand Wizard of the KKK white supremacist group come out and thank President Trump for his support. I've been very proud of the Republicans in the Congress who have tweeted and put out statements and called out President Trump by name from the stage. Right now in America, the Congress of the United States, which convenes in the Capitol in Washington, D.C. to legislate throughout the year, are back in their home districts for the month of August. They're meeting with their constituents one-on-one in town halls. And so they're hearing their dismay. And I think it's wonderful that they're taking a chance to disavow these comments by the president specifically, especially, as well as all of it. And I believe that there could be a wonderful opportunity for the Republican Party, which is being taken down by Donald Trump right now, to return to Congress after the recess, work with the Democrats, and really set forth better laws against hate crimes and more strategy on restrictions. So this could be an opportunity. I think the Congress has got to take this country into their hands and out of those of Donald Trump right now.
Mr. Andrews, on the other hand, we heard about the spat of words between President Trump and also Lindsey Graham, of course, a Republican senator, talking about exactly what President Trump said. President Trump, of course, is trying to deny all the negatives associated with what his words were, according to Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham is stating his original stand. So how should we understand the fight between these two men in a way between President Trump and the establishment of the Republican Party?
Well, Lindsey Graham is certainly right in this instance, and Senator McConnell, who's the majority leader in the Senate side, Paul Ryan, who of course is the Speaker of the House, and Ms. Romney, who is the chairwoman of the RNC, have all come out with statements against what Mr. Trump has said, and have all disavowed the KKK, white supremacy, etc. But we have to go a further step by having, I believe, the Republican conference, when you come back in the House and the Senate, actually release a statement and say, hey, this is not what we stand for. And something that the Republicans in Congress could do is begin the removal of Confederate statues that are in Statuary Hall and also placed in other places around the halls of Congress. It really is up to the states to be able to make the final decision there on whether or not those statues stay. However, releasing some kind of statement from the conference, I think, would be the right thing to do in this case, and would hopefully help continue to distance the party from these folks that really have nothing to do with what Republicans have stood for over the years, and we can't continue to allow it to be murky in terms of our
Da,
association.
here in Beijing, I do have two questions for you. One is removing the statues is one thing. We heard and we saw political statues being removed in one country or the other. Eventually, some with some follow-up actions, some without real actions and without real results as being expected. And the other thing is people have been criticizing President Trump. There have been pressure from his own parties on him, but he's a very, in a way, strong political figure. Is this going to be some of the so-called last straw on his back as a political figure in the U.S. politics? Two questions for you, very different direction. Mr. Da, first one.
I think I'd like to answer the second question first.
Go ahead.
I don't think, of course, this new latest event, I think, created a lot of trouble and pressure for President Trump. But I think in terms of his political future, I think it still depends on, particularly depends on his relationship with the Republican establishment, the Republican congressman and woman in the Congress. So I don't think it's serious enough to, to have really serious impact on his political future. But of course, created difficult. And for the statues, I think this is I think this is a kind of another, I call it, new chapter of the culture war in the United States. It's very controversial issue, and different people have different view on those figures, like Robert Lee. I agree with our American colleagues. I think this is an issue that should be decided by the state and by the local government. But now I think the key issue is the culture war between the traditional old American, a white American, with a diversified new American, new U.S. I think what we are witnessing is this new development in the United States.
Very important comments, I would say. Mr. Schwartz, we see events revolving racial issues every year happen from time to time. But the question really is, how much has the U.S. changed? How much the realities on the ground is likely to grab the directions of politics in the United States? We have seen some recent events going on, whether it's about immigrants, whether it's about a stepping down of a president who's the first African American in the United States. But what would all of these mean eventually? It's a big question mark Mr. Da earlier raised for us. Ms. Schwartz.
It's a very good question, Tian, because we've seen an evolution both with the Barack Obama presidency of the first African American, of which he was very successful, jobs in other areas. And then we've now moved into a very hot contested race last year in a campaign with Donald Trump, where there was very loose talk about immigrants and threats of violence at his rallies. And then now we're here in a presidency, and I do not believe that Donald Trump has moved from running for president versus being president, which I think is very detrimental. But I think what is very telling, which is really worrying to me, is that President Trump's base support is still there. And only about 52% disagreed with him this week out of his support, and that just seems like a very high number that still do support his comments on Charlottesville. But I think it's interesting to realize that when even Richard Nixon was impeached, he had a 32% approval rating. But again, when you look inside the numbers, it does give me worry. You've got to disavow the president, these other Republicans running for re-election next year. But I think you have to do more than disavow. You need to take some action. And I'm worried that they're worried to take action because he still has this number attached to him. I believe, though, in light of everything, if you stand out and stand up, you'll be given credit for it.
Okay. I want to, before we go back to Mr. Andrews. You're an African American. You're also related to the Republican Party, so you are probably more closely linked to what we're talking about today than any one of us. What do you make of what Ms. Schwartz just said? What are the real actions do you think the Republican Party and President Trump should take in order to make sure the opinions and views are well understood and the country is going in the right direction? Mr. Andrews, very briefly from you, but concrete points.
Sure, thank you. I grew up in a small town in South Alabama. Many of you will know the history there in Alabama in terms of slavery, the civil rights movement, etc. The removal of these statues, Republican Governor Rick Scott in Florida signed an order to remove a Confederate statue representing Florida that's in the United States Congress building already last year. And so the fact that removal of these statues is happening means that we're making progress. However, we're not where we need to be yet. And currently, President Donald Trump's statements are keeping us from being able to make the progress that we need to make as a country so that we can all move forward together and so that we can get to the infrastructure plans, we can get to tax reforms, so we can get to health care. We can't get to any of those things because of this distraction right now. And so as an African American in the United States of America, I'm happy to see the progress that we're making, but Republicans have to Mrs. Schwartz's point, come against Donald Trump and make sure that it's not just words, but also actions.